Thanks so much for joining us today for our latest Comms in Question webinar. My name is Jeff Keay. I'm an executive consultant in leadership strategy, media relations, and issues management here at Curious Public. As a reminder, if you like the discussion today and want to see more, you can check out the webinar section of our website to find all of our past episodes. We're informally calling today's conversation Hacks versus Flacks, the hacks being the journalists and the flacks being the PR folks, or more formally, the media relations professionals. Cue the eye rolls from the journalists. The media have long been an essential part of how we tell stories in the communications business. And whether you work in journalism or PR, you need people to trust you so they believe the stories you tell. But the relationship between the two sides has a natural tension. Journalists want information, all of it, all of the time. And the flack's job is to control the information flow on behalf of their clients or organizations. So the question for today is, how can both work together to create public trust? Not unlike other populations, Canadians' trust is down. Edelman's 2024 Canadian Trust Barometer found that between 55 and 60% of Canadians feel that business and government leaders and reporters are purposefully trying to mislead people through falsehoods or exaggerations. That percentage is up 5 to 7 points from 2023. So what does that mean for all of us? And what can we do as communications professionals? So to help dig deeper into this question, we're joined by an outstanding panel of expert journalists and communications and media relations experts. Let me introduce you to them. First off, Sumi Shanmuganathan is the Associate Vice President of Marketing and Communications at George Brown College and comes to our conversation with more than 20 years of experience crafting communication strategies. She's worked with top organizations, including Fortune 500 companies, government, and global nonprofits, always building credibility through authentic messaging. It's great to see you here, Sumi. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Great to be here.
Rob Ferguson is a longtime reporter with the Toronto Star. Now he's actually out covering something at Queen's Park right now, and hopefully he's going to join us in progress. But I'll introduce him anyways. Before that, he's been at Queen's Park for more than 20 years. He was a business reporter for the Toronto Star, covering banking, mutual funds, the stock market, and personal finance beats. He's also a long-standing Queen's Park Press Gallery executive member, having served 3 times as the Ontario Legislative Press Gallery president. Full disclosure, Rob and I met a long time ago when I worked for a couple of the big banks, and my wife was one of his journalist colleagues at the Star. I hope he joins us. Wendy Mesley, many of you will know her from her many years at the CBC as a national correspondent and host of several national programs, including The National. Wendy's one of Canada's most trusted journalists and is one of our country's newest podcasters with her show, Women of Ill Repute, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts. Full disclosure again, Wendy and I were colleagues at the CBC, although we were sometimes on opposite sides of that hack-flack dynamic. Wendy, it's great to see you.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you. I get to ask all the questions though, right?
I know, you do. And Ben Chin serves as a senior advisor to the Prime Minister's office, advising on some of Canada's most pressing issues. Before joining the federal government, Ben served in senior roles for the premiers of British Columbia and Ontario, as well as within the public and private sectors. He began his career as a journalist, reporting for CBC, CTV, and City TV. Ben, it's nice to meet you for the first time. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I don't know how we've never met, Jeff, but it's great to be here. Thank you very much. And great to see Wendy and Sumi again as well.
That's
and
great.
Rob, who's coming, apparently. He has a job.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have lots of questions for our guests, but all you viewers can also weigh in on the discussion or ask questions through the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as time allows. So shall we begin? I think maybe it's worth starting with an existential question. With all of the layoffs and changes in the media landscape, is media relations still an important function and skill? Should companies, governments, or people still care what the media report on? It's kind of a broad question, but it's a pretty broad environment out there right now. Is it a useful function to have a media relations person for an organization or any other entity?
It depends what you mean by media relations. So as a journalist, we used to really matter. Like I was on the Hill way before Ben was, 1,000 years ago, and I started covering Levesque, who was like an honest guy, and then I went to Ottawa, and it was all about the message. So I don't think that it does matter as much as it used to. Politicians now they reach past the media. They don't care as much about the media. Maybe Ben will say it differently, but I think it still matters. But it's funny. I was talking to a senior American. Well, he's Canadian, but he lives in Washington now, and he was saying, we'll talk about the future, but these days it doesn't matter as much. I don't think. I think the media is very different. We teach the same things, but most of the power is in the hands not of the journalists anymore, and I don't think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and I worry about that. I think, both from the financial end and then, the way users, the consumers use the media now and what choices they have. And to be totally honest, I think, although I don't work in communications on a daily basis or in media relations, I think that there is a broad range of ways to communicate with the public, but the media remains an important part of that. And I think, where it's important is that, I remember hearing people discuss something about, something that was going on in BC politics. And I said to them, "Oh, so you watch the 6 o'clock news?" And they said, "No, we share, my friend shared it with me on Facebook." So
Yeah.
a lot of times the content is still generated by the media that does get shared. And actually, though that's when it's better than some of the disinformation and misinformation that's out there, very purposefully kind of trying to obscure, the conversation going on. So I do think it's important for organizations to have some, kind of know-how around how to deal with the media when the media calls, understand what their needs are, and be able to sort of, kind of work both sides of that with the people that they answer to in the organization to say, like, we have to, this is something that we have to respond to or not, or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
the
it's
last
it's
week-
funny,
oh,
Sumi. We were talking about it just before we
Yeah.
went on air. We were talking about how much has changed, and you think it's like you are very clear about how you need to deal with social media these
Yeah.
days, and you do have to be quick. And I mean, Ben and I like when I was in Montreal 1,000 years ago, I used to go and have wine at lunch. There's no time. So now you teach people how to tweet during the press conference.
No, yeah. I mean, media, certainly relations on our team is still very much important. It's just the landscape has changed, right? It's not traditional journalism. I mean, Wendy, you're a podcaster. We would reach out to you because you're still getting the message out to the audience. So it's just the formats and the channels have changed, but I still think there's a value in sort of public relations and communications professionals, because on our end, we're looking at sort of like niche markets where it's not disseminating to like the mass market anymore. We have to be very sort of strategic in who we reach out to, how we pitch, what are the pitches that we're sending to you, because you only have so much time. There's less of you all in the field now, so we have to be very mindful of that. But that said, you're using your own channels, whether you're on Twitter now, Thread, or you're doing it on Instagram or LinkedIn, versus going through sort of the traditional sort of CBC or City or one of their those pieces, because you probably reach up further than some of them do, especially for our audience because they're younger and they get their information on social, right? So the channels have changed, but I still think like there's value in having folks that understand how to communicate with individuals that are disseminating information, regardless of whether they're traditional media or, as we generally work with, influencers in some cases now, right?
I'm thinking in terms of a lot of communications people now are working for large, complicated organizations, and this is kind of a distinction from organizational communications, if you like, versus say in the political sphere. But in both cases, I think often the person you're trying to get to is a busy person who's doing things, And I've always thought that it was useful to have a point of contact as an entryway in. And I think it's interesting when you think that, the journalism school people are sort of taught to, by default, sort of try to subvert or circumvent those control people, if you want to use that term. But I also wonder if there's a benefit to establishing relationships with those people as an entryway into the organization or to the people you want to talk to.
Well, it's interesting. I used to have, when I was on the Hill, on Parliament Hill, and at the National Assembly, and I did politics for a number of years. I had sources, and I think everybody has sources, and some you trust and some you don't trust, and maybe we'll get into that later. But I think it's changed, and I'm wondering now if there is even such a thing as a headline. Like, isn't it all memes and clips, and like, do we actually matter? So I'm all alone here. So it's I'm waiting for Rob to show up and then we can get into the more serious eye rolling.
I think that the thing I've noticed, I guess my complaint about the media, and it's not to any particular individual, is because of the clicks and that sort of clickbait culture, and and establishing sort of advertising rates and all of the business aspects of it. I find there's a kind of journalism now which is a really provocative headline and a very provocative first paragraph, and then when you read a page and a half of it and you get to the end of it, it turns out to be nothing. Like, they're like, is this the end of the world? And then it's like, no, it's not actually. And it's sort of, I always feel kind of ripped off when that happens as a reader, when it doesn't have something to do with me or with our government. There are times that I read and I think, that's kind of not fair. Like, because the first part of it is meant to be provocative to get eyeballs, but it's not actually kind of a fair characterization of, let's say it's a mistake or something bad or something good, whatever it might be. So I think there is a bit of that pressure. People still do cultivate sources, and I think there's kind of two kinds of journalism that I notice in Ottawa from the gallery these days, and which I think was ever thus, which is there's the sort of thoughtful commentary folks who are columnists who've been around a long time, many of whom I enjoyed speaking with. I don't know what good it does. Like, it might just be, me talking to a few people just like me through them and people just like them. And they are, agree, disagree. They're on different parts of the political spectrum, have different attitudes, but you sort of know where they're coming from. And then there's the sort of daily grind folks that are grinding through just the massive stuff. And I think that massive stuff, you do need, in addition to your sources, you do need to have somebody being traffic cop and saying, well, actually the Minister of Transport has that, or, sure, the PM is going to be available at 2:00. Like, just, it's helpful to kind of direct that stuff. And then I find that, there are times when people will call me and say, look, we've had 2 sources say this, or 3 sources. Is that true? And, it's an awkward position to be in, because, if it is true, I can't, and I can't say, I don't want to lie. And so I will say, I can't speak to that, or, but a pattern emerges, because there are the times that I'll say, no, that's absolutely not true. And so,
but I think that's
yeah.
the crucial thing
Yeah.
to me is, will someone actually lie to my face?
Yeah.
And I'll still use them. Like, when I was on Marketplace, there were lots of bad people and, crooked contractors and whatever. And so we wanted them to, like, fess up or get caught with the pea cup or whatever in their hand. But most of the time, you don't want people to treat you like you're stupid. So it's but sometimes you do have to use, I think I wrote a piece about it, about the fudge file. Sometimes you do have to say, well, I can't talk about that because you can't. I'm sure that Sumi has a few examples.
Probably do. I mean, I have no I have a number of former journalists on my team, so I like journalists, and I think it's important for, at least in like for our institution, like we want to be able to share sort of timely and accurate information. So building that trust, Wendy, with you all is very important. I don't like it's hard to lie these days because you'll get caught in it eventually. Everybody has their phones at their fingertips, and everybody's a fact checker. I mean, we hope everybody's fact checking the news that they read, right? And I think to Ben's point, it's when it comes to like larger organization, having somebody sort of triage the request is important because things can get lost, and everybody has differing opinions. And when it comes to higher ed institution academia, it's like it's very much nuanced, right? That somebody can get easily offended. So we certainly want to be able to put our best foot forward with you all. That said, building that trust and sharing that information is very important. But I mean, there's examples most recently of like it's not more so of people not sharing the right information, but folks maybe not prepping their senior leaders to go in front of media and say the right thing, right? So that's what
But
we're
we
always
like
afraid
that.
of.
We
You like
love
that
it when
'cause it's like
when it
clickbait,
goes off.
right?
Yeah, when it goes
Yeah.
off track, and when
Well,
to me that's reality.
yeah.
But
And
it
clicks.
does not serve your client.
No, and then I have to come in and clean up afterwards.
Yeah, we
And I
like
think
that though.
the being truthful and trustworthy cuts both ways, right? Like
Yeah.
on I always think in political issues management and communications, you have to have a little perspective, which is sometimes you're going to get beat up because you made a mistake. And, none of us are perfect. And there are days that, we've done something that wasn't quite right and we're going to get criticized for it, and just take the lumps and get over it and do something right the next day. And that's probably the best kind of issues management. It's not to burn all your relationships on day one by not telling the truth. But there are reporters that I trust more than others, and columnists, because you make deals along the way, right? Like somebody finds out, oh, tomorrow you're going, next week you're going to announce this multi-billion-dollar excellent thing, and I'm going to have it in the paper tomorrow. And I say, well, that's going to cause a bunch of problems for not only us, but for the shareholders of this company and this and that. Is there any way you can hold it till, we'll give you more details, and then can you hold it till next Monday? And they say, well, other people are sniffing around. I'll tell you what, if anybody else catches wind of it, I'll let you know so that you can go right away. And you kind of have to, both sides have to honor that. And, years and years of doing that with people, then okay, well, Wendy says she's going to hold it till next Monday and go with it. But I've committed to her. If Jeff calls
If she
me,
has to, she has to. Yeah.
then she has to go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I keep waiting for Rob to magically appear and be my friend and all of this eye rolling, but it's Jeff said something very important off the top, which is journalists want all of the information. We want the good, the bad, and to me, people, I know you do a lot more than PR. You do media relations. You teach people not to say something stupid, to go into something prepared, which we hate, but whatever. I understand the need for it. But we don't always work together. Like I think you have presented this as an idea of like Jeff is his wife is a former journalist. My husband is a marketer, so we kind of like each other.
We hope so.
Not
and we
all the
get
time, but usually.
and we always get along, but I'm not sure that journalism is in a very good place right now. Like and I think it's getting worse as it's becoming less balanced because we use each other. I'm like Ben has talked about how, for good reason, he has used journalists. We use well, sometimes we call them lobbyists, and they don't like to be called that anymore. But they're on panels and they're respected or whatever. There's lots and lots of spokespeople, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure, like, not all journalists need to be trusted, as Ben says. But at least we try. At least a good journalist believes in trying to stick to the facts. A good PR person or a good marketing person wants to do something good for their client and hopefully not lie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk too much, but I think you're exactly right. We're not friends, right?
Yeah.
Like we each have a job to do, and we're not there to do each other favors, and there should be no expectation of that.
Yeah.
And but I will say, like in Ottawa, with the Parliamentary Gallery, of course, there are people that I like more than others. There are people that I trust more than others. But I don't think I've ever had a conversation that, if I said, "Do you really think that that's fair to do that?" Um, with that, because aren't you actually assuming this? Like when you have a conversation like that with somebody, I can't recall any that went badly, whether they agreed or disagreed, whether I respect their work or don't respect their work. There's like an ethical foundation there in pretty much everybody I deal with.
Mm-hmm.
That is not, they're not just, kind of making it up as they go along. By the time they've ended up in Ottawa, they've got sort of the bone structure of good journalism there, regardless of what I might think of their work.
Yeah.
And there is kind of, there are sort of tenets of journalism that they're following that you can appeal to or talk about with them.
Yeah, I think just
sorry, go ahead.
Jeff.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just building on what Ben said, I won't name names, but, there are certainly journalists out there that, when we get their calls, we're like, oh no, like what's going to happen, right? We are very fearful because, we may have the information and we may have not done anything, but we can, the narrative can be a negative. But in even dealing with them, it's always like, just be truthful and transparent. Like, this is the situation we're dealing with. Here's the information. And generally it has come out like either they have dropped the story or they've haven't been as negative as we would expect them to be. But so there are certainly those cases I think we're always fearful of. But to Ben's, like we're not friends, but we all have to work together, right? We kind of need each other, and I understand that there's trust in media is very fragile these days, but we kind of still need each other to be able to put out the right information. And the credibility as like the journalists that you have is important for us, because yes, we can go to influencers and newly formed podcasters, but like for instance, Wendy, with your podcast, you come with years of experience, right? So for me, if I want to put an executive in front of you, like that's a lot more important, because you're giving them a bit more gravitas to their experience as well, because of what your background is, and that experience is very important for me as well, right? So there's those components.
You teach marketing, and Jeff, you do marketing, and it's mostly for institutions. But for me, I've run into PR people who I don't want to identify them or the products that they were promoting. But part of their job was, and I see myself as, I may have an agenda as a journalist, but I see myself as honest and transparent and whatever. Maybe some would disagree. But part of her job was telling people not to talk to me because, it would be negative. So what is negative depends on the viewer, I suppose. So it sounds like, is Rob here? It sounds like there's somebody here.
Rob's been having some technical issues. We're trying to get him in here. So
okay.
Going back to that data point from Edelman's, I find it kind of astonishing. Most Canadians, believe media, business, and government leaders are purposefully misleading the public. So how does that affect your job or what you do? And how does it affect both sides of that hacks and flacks relationship? I mean, we'll get into trust, but I think that this is a fundamental trust question, really.
I think it's very disturbing because I think, I'll tell you something, I do a lot of work in sort of attracting investment, sort of in the decarbonization economy in my job, right? So I talk to a lot of foreign CEOs and people that have made investments in Canada. And always one of the top reasons why they're coming here is it's a very unstable world right now. And we think you have strong democratic institutions and Canada has stability. So you hear that from people that don't live here. And, And I know, you look at the trust barometers and I can feel it. The trust levels going down on journalists or in political institutions or politicians or democracy. And, that is very, very disturbing. And I don't like, if I had an answer for that, hopefully we would have solved it by now. One part of it is, I think, we probably have contributed to the erosion of trust on both sides in terms of just looking at journalism and public policy and politics is, journalists haven't helped the politicians. Maybe the politicians haven't helped themselves much. Politicians haven't really helped the journalists either. And I think we're living at a time when you actually can make good political hay out of, making fun of the journalist or going after journalism or being anti-media. And we see that on both sides of the border with certain politicians, right? And I think maybe one thing we can do is kind of both take our responsibilities more seriously and to each other, despite how tense a situation may be, and just sort of treat the other with respect. The hopeful side is, I think that when it does matter, like when Canadians do tune in because there's an election underway or they have to make a choice, then they do trust journalism. They consume a lot of it. They figure out what all these parties are saying, what their promises are. They may not pay attention all the way through the 4 years, but in those 2-3 months, they'll pay a lot of attention. So that tells me it's not a complete lack of trust.
That's let me just jump in here, because on that point, speaking of trustworthy, authoritative journalism, I understand Rob Ferguson is here. We may not have him on camera.
Just something about him and how
we have a disembodied voice. Welcome, Rob.
I am here. Sorry, I had trouble with my camera. I can see myself, which is not the greatest thing, and you're not missing anything. But you guys apparently can't see me. You can only hear me, which is just as well,
Rob.
since I'm a. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Ben.
Hey,
Sumi.
I've been waiting for you to show up because
Yeah, sorry.
we won't see the eye rolling now.
Yeah, I can eye roll real good, so don't worry about that. Am I eye rolling at Ben, or who am I eye rolling at?
Well,
let me ask you an easy question.
Yeah.
Sure, because I've missed a lot of this. Rob. So yeah.
No, it's okay. We're talking about basically the relationships and sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're not so easy. So in your experience as a primarily political correspondent these days at Queen's Park, and for the benefit of communications people who are watching and listening who may be relatively new to the whole dynamic, in your experience, what makes for good media relations, and what really risks sending it right off the rails? I mean, I'll ask you first, and then the rest of us can weigh in. The rest of you can weigh in.
Sure. I think what makes good media relations is actually take that word relations and you change it to relationships. So, if you keep open communications and you treat us with respect, we will treat you with respect. And the important thing, and I found this when I covered banking and Bay Street and that as well, is basically having an open line of communication or a good introduction, and not trying to, it's all transactional, but sometimes you have to put a little lipstick on the transactional, and try to build some kind of a rapport, because that way it just works a lot easier. And there are times where it's going to be confrontational, and Ben and I and my colleague Rob Benzie, we've had disagreements and whatnot, and you get pissed off with each other sometimes when Ben worked for Dalton. But we also had lots of times where there were very open communications, and a good communicator, a good media relations person will come in and might lay a little bit of behind the scenes stuff on the table, so you understand things a little better, and you're reporting it from a more full context. So I'm trying to think of an example of that, and one could be like a politician who's in trouble. Obviously whoever's handling that wants things to come out as good as possible, and I guess a good example of that is Michael Bryant when he was a cabinet minister under McGuinty, and he had that altercation with a cyclist and he ran over that guy. Bryant and his people already had good relations with the gallery, and I'm not saying we gave Michael Bryant an easy ride, because I don't think he had an easy ride on that, but because people had relationships and open lines of communications, things were maybe probably smoother than they would have been otherwise when you just assume the worst.
I think it's really important, Rob, that you talk about respect, and that was something about that we talked about just before you joined, which was the whole matter of trust. And there are some that you trust, and there are some that you don't trust, and some you put on the air anyway because you need to as a journalist. But I think that it does come down to respect. It does come down to some level of trust to who you're going to talk to. But I also think there's a massive distinction between us and the fake news, the stuff that's happening. Like, we're Canadians, and it's very, very different here than in Europe, than in the United States, than in anywhere else. And so it hurts when it really hurts as a journalist to be told that you're full of shit, and that I'm sorry if I'm using that word, and and that you're making stuff up. So I've heard the biased stuff forever, but at least we don't make stuff up, like even the people who Ben or anybody might disagree with, that Sumi might disagree with, it's fact-based. And so I just wanted to get on the record that it hurts. It really hurts.
To go what you just said, Wendy, like I find that when we get accused of bias, oftentimes it is, as you know, from people who are bent out of shape on one way or another, too far into the weeds on their own side, and they can't see the bigger picture. And we do try to see the bigger picture. I do pride myself on writing fair stories in proper context. And I think, when reporters do that, and they aren't, like you could say these days, some beat reporters are have a bit of an activist bent. And I guess depending on your beat, a bit of an activist bent is okay, but you still have to do it fairly. I'm thinking right now of maybe health reporters writing about safe consumption sites and all the controversy around that. You got to be careful how far you go, and you have to present all the sides and basically use evidence and data, and then the rest should fall into place.
Well, the whole all sides thing is fascinating because, I was around when it was bad to say that gay marriage was okay. It was bad to say that humans were contributing to environmental change. And now we sort of say those things, obviously, or at least I do. But yeah, it's difficult, the whole sidesism thing. And if you've got clients, Sumi, I'm sure you've got a couple of clients who would disagree with me. Or maybe you don't. Maybe it's 10 years ago.
No, I mean, certainly. I think one of the thing is, like, I think to Ben's and Rob's point, it's about connections, but there are sort of slanted nuance or slanted reporting, right? And maybe it's not you all. Certainly, I think there are great reporters that we work with that, tell the truth, and they do provide a nuanced, sort of balanced approach on all sides. But we have kind of made a disservice to ourselves over the years trying to sell papers, providing those clickbait sort of headlines. And then when, I think Ben's point earlier, when you read through the article, like it's not really a big issue, right? I think that's just because everybody is consuming everything very quickly, and you gotta attract their attentions very quickly. And so, what's going to sell? It's something somebody has done negatively, so therefore let's put that in the headline. And so it's a little hard for us sometimes in finding with less of you, less of you out there, the right folks to reach out to. So we end up like doing our own stuff, right? Or I think a lot more, certainly a lot more companies and organizations are leaning towards like sponsored post. And I know back in the day, like if you put a sponsored post, it was like, oh no, like that is, it's just propaganda. But certainly, like if we want to be able to get out our message nowadays, that's where we're looking at, and which is not like a lack of trust in everybody in journalism, but there are certainly some that, you know, have leaned towards a certain sort of bent in order to sell news, which understandable. That it's a little hard to kind of figure out who's who, and cultivating those connections and relationship is very important, which is like for my team is like reach out to the folks out on the beat too that we can connect to, because you know if we want to tell a story, we want to be able to connect to the right person that's credible, right? So
is it possible to be as a practitioner, a communications practitioner, do you think it's possible or more possible or more difficult now to be perceived as an honest broker of information on behalf of your organization? Because there's a tension there, right? I mean, you want to be open with all of the information, but at the same time, you want to try to reflect your organization in the best possible light. Easy to do if it's a great organization, not so easy to do if it's an organization that's found itself in difficulty, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, I think it's certainly not as easy. We have to be very mindful. I mean, I think when it comes to at least the world I'm in right now in academia, we have to be very, very careful as to what we put out there, right? And certainly it's making sure that the journalists that we're speaking to, like we share that information. We share as much information as possible. What we can share, we certainly say like, you know, this is a reason why we're not able to, or like just for your background information. But having that open conversation with journalists, I think is important, because so that you understand the nuances of our story, because it can, depending on who's listening to us, like the narrative can change very easily. And if it's not the narrative that we want to put out there, I think we need to be frank and open with you all to be able to say, like, this is what we're dealing with, and being able to provide that information. But I mean, I think to your point, it's not easy, Jeff. We have to be very, very careful in who we reach out to and the information that we put out there. And when it comes to a larger organization, we go through like channels and channels of approval before anything is sent to you. And as communications professionals and academia, like every little word counts, right? Every little word has its story behind it that we have to be very mindful, and especially in this climate these days. So
we are so aware as journalists, we're so aware of the message and that it's gone through 1,000 people, and it just feels like bull by the time it comes out.
it is.
And so
Sometimes.
Yes.
I do wonder about the whole, like, what is misleading? Like you've talked about influencers, and it was a few years ago, it was 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a journalism thing, and I was pimped out as a to a table by the big bank, and so the big bank person was very nice and very open, and said that they're not spending nearly as much money on advertising anymore, that because it's easier, there's no media awareness about influencers. So you can say, oh, I'm this influencer and I got this great mortgage, and everybody will believe them because there's no media awareness. There's lots of media awareness about us. In fact, some people even say we're fake news, but we're not. So what is misleading? I mean, you're different, Sumi. I mean, and you know, you work for an academic association, and most of your clients, Jeff, are institutional, and politics is politics. But there are people who have spokespeople who are just selling a product.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say, unless I might have my head in the sand, but I would say that most of the journalists or the gallery that deals with our communications team and our press secretaries would say that they are generally competent and trustworthy. And, you know, I think that there's a good relationship there, as Rob was mentioning, despite all the ups and downs. You know, the interactions I have with reporters, I think, are pretty good. It's generally more truth testing and, you know, what's what are you guys thinking behind this? You know, kind of, it's not so much the transactional, we're announcing X, Y, and Z tomorrow. I think the tension, and this is something I felt actually with, you know, even with Rob and his partner, Rob Benzie, in the past too, is especially for incumbent governments, when you're in government and you're heading into an election year, or you're past the first 2 years of your mandate, you want to talk about the thing. You know, you want to talk about $10 childcare, whatever the initiative is. Everybody else wants to talk about, in the gallery, wants to talk about, are you up or down? Where are you in the polls? The horse race. And so there's this constant tension of, you know, and it is frustrating to me, because it's like, look, we didn't get elected for 2 years and then 2 years of election talk. We're still, like us, hate us, whatever you feel towards us, we still have a mandate left to deliver on our promises and to do it. And these are things that we believe are important things. There'll be time to talk about that later, but right now, assess us on these things, assess these things is, you know, on the one hand, what one side is doing, and what the other side's doing is like, they want to talk about the Leger poll, right? So there is that tension does exist in politics. It always has. And there's good reasons on both sides for why, you know, reporters feel the way they do on that given day, and why, you know, the politician is frustrated on that. And some of that messaging discipline and spin comes from that, right? Is to be effectively like, how do we get our thing out there in this environment of these questions happening?
To Ben's point, I should just pop in with this. We're kind of at that point with the Ford government now
Right.
here in Ontario, because you know, the House isn't coming back until October 21st. They don't have a lot of pancakes on the griddle, so to speak, anymore. They just got the convenience store booze out there, and we're waiting on, you know, the RCMP investigation into the Greenbelt, and the Liberals have a policy convention this weekend in London. So there's not a lot around here going on right now other than the horse race and mischief. So when governments kind of run out of steam and run out of their agenda and they're thinking of an early election, that's, you know, when we do kind of turn to the horse race. But in the meantime, we'll seize on any kind of policy or anything, you know, any meaty substance that will come out.
And you're right to do it with the Ford government, Rob. Keep it up.
Okay, thank you for that advice, Ben.
Nice. Let me contrast the question. I mean, Rob's a beat reporter. I mean, he's a Queen's Park correspondent. But you know, the sad reality is that there is a lot fewer journalists out there working these days, and the demand for content is, you know, insatiable and never ending. I think, you know, as reporters have left the business or retired or whatever, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that has left the building. So I'm wondering if that creates a situation for the communications practitioners. It imposes some sort of an obligation on them to be more forthcoming, to be more trustworthy, because we're never getting away from this question of trust, to help journalists understand organizations or policy options or all of that more, because a lot of those journalists may be coming to the table with a lot less, you know, baked in knowledge, and I just wonder if that can be a helpful thing, or whether that just increases the stress levels of the journalists frantically trying to create things.
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah.
Because I just want to say this is like, first of all, this panel, like, Wendy is somebody I admired and respected when I worked at the CBC, because she was kind of the least, not at all Ron Burgundy of any of the anchors there, and that culture does sink in on television. And Rob is one of the best political reporters in the country, super fair, always, you know, I can't, like you said, we argued. I can't even remember us ever arguing. Benzie, definitely I've argued with, but
Me too.
Yeah, but you were just there getting sprayed by the fight that Benzie and I were having. But I think, like, you know, not to say that I always agreed, but always fair. You know, whether I was on the right side of the stick or not. I think today, I wouldn't say that, of course, the loss of institutional information is not good, and that sort of history and people have been around for a while. That's not good. There's a lot of young talent. And the one thing I do think that I notice a lot, and I think it's completely legitimate, is, when you think about what is the kind of the greatest challenge, it's hard to say, like, other than climate, other than what's going on in the world, is there is a kind of generational equity issue in Canada and in the US and a lot of the developed world, actually. And it's not easy to be young. So you don't have the same opportunities as a journalist starting out in terms of housing or the pay scale or where your career is going to go. It's like when I started in journalism in 1988 or whatever, like I had dreams of massive wealth, like there was this road paved with gold ahead of me if everything worked out.
Yeah.
There is no, so these guys are fighting, these guys and gals are fighting for their jobs, to stay on their jobs. They can't find housing. Then they see some schmuck promising better housing policy. And of course they're skeptical. Like they're living that life of a challenged life in a very challenged career path that they've chosen. Like I would say, if I had kids, I'd say, don't go into journalism, right?
Yeah,
Like,
well, I have a 25-year-old, and she was working for a rather small web thing out of Montreal, and that wasn't for her. And so she had all of the, didn't want to be like me, but wanted to be herself in the media business. There's no jobs. So Sumi was talking about it's difficult from her end because there's nobody to reach out to. Well, imagine being us. We're just shrinking and you're growing. Like the power is in your hands. I mean, people need more spokespeople and they need more honest spokespeople. But are they going to get that, or are they just going to get more spokespeople? Because the power is now in the hands, I think, in the hands of the marketers. And maybe Ben or Rob can speak to this more, but it used to be that, we would make jokes about people going to the dark side. Well, there is no more dark side anymore, because that's where all the jobs and the money and like all the journalists now just they waltz on over. It's that's where the jobs are. So anyway.
Yeah, I speak to a lot of journalism school classes, and I always ask how many people want to go into journalism and how many want to go into like communications or PR, and like generally it's only a very few hands that go up for people who want to be journalists.
Mhm.
Because we're not trusted anymore, and it's on the
and there's no
curriculum.
money and the jobs are shit, and we had a talk in here in the bureau just a few months ago about housing. It's like we're lucky we're all old, and because we all said with the way real estate prices have gone in Toronto, we couldn't afford to buy our own homes anymore.
Yeah.
So,
No, there are
like,
a lot of talented young people. It's just and the CBC, CTV, even the newspapers, they're all shrinking, and whether deservedly or not, they're all shrinking, and you guys are growing. So does that mean more trust, or does that mean less trust? I don't know.
So I don't think it's less trust. I mean, I've got a number of former journalists on my team, and I love hiring them because they know how to tell a story, right? So the experience that they've received in journalism is very important for me. And I think a part of it is that we end up now having to tell our own stories a lot more, because you all are shrinking. The media landscape is shrinking. So, we're focused on providing good storytelling through our own channels, whether through social media or web content. We're doing a lot more video content. But at the same time, it's important, like the relationship between you all and my team is still very much important, because there are some certain stories that no matter what we put on our own channels, there are a lot more gravitas to them when it's when it's through an accredited media source or an accredited journalist, right? So especially when it comes to our senior executives and thought leadership around that piece. But when it comes to me getting in front of like young students and the younger generation, it's all social media. It's all through our web and like storytelling through those pieces. So yeah, I guess in a sense, they have kind of come to the dark side because the dark side has grown quite a bit over the years because the media side has been shrinking so much. But I mean, I don't know if there's a fix or that'll ever like tip over or change the other way around. But certainly on our end, we're putting a lot more resources into sort of like certainly the own channels and sponsored post and marketing and advertising buys. I spend more time speaking with media partners around our advertising buys and our sponsored advertorials versus an op-ed or an actual story through that's being like written by a journalist with your sort of narrative or your stance on it, right? It's all us at the moment, and it's just a fact at the moment that we can't seem to, like, it's not something that we can avoid. We've just learned to adapt.
Yeah, I love a lot
I
of
have.
flacks, but when I was at journalism school 1,000 years ago, when it was called Ryerson, it's now called Metropolitan University, there was no PR. We were taught that PR was the enemy, and now it's taught. Like,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to take journalism.
Well,
Sorry,
back
Ben.
then everybody would have said, I want to be a foreign correspondent. And
Yeah.
some of them would have become producers on lifestyle shows later or whatever happened. But everybody started off that way, right? And I guess my point is, yes, that's all true. And there is this kind of shrinking of journalism, growth in marketing. There's this loss of institutional knowledge. There's a lack of investment. But the lived experience of young journalists that are covering kind of the story of our time, which is the generation that's going to come of age in the 21st century going to have the same opportunities as previous generations? That's the story. I think that the skepticism they bring to things because of they can't find an apartment to rent, how hard they drive on it, they're going to do important work. And I think that the only solution for it is, where are the owners of journalism in this? As people find out that maybe I shouldn't own a newspaper if I want to make a lot of money, as they reach that conclusion, maybe it'll start to attract more and more people who say, I'm going to do this because I want to support it. I have money and I'm going to.
Or because they want to make the world better. I mean, I've always been struck by, and it was a liberal strategist years and years ago. He said, "You think we know everything? We don't." I mean, that was probably the best piece of advice I had, is that we're all trying, and some of us are trying for good.
We're getting down to the last couple of minutes. We haven't really talked about social media. I just have a question from the room that I hope we can just deal with briefly, if you like. Social media enables us all as communicators to engage more directly with people. How has your engagement with readers via social media impacted how you cover stories and even choose the stories that you cover? You only have a minute each.
I'll start. Social media is generally a cesspool. I find most of the comments I get on Twitter. I mean, since Elon Musk took over and people have bailed on Twitter a lot, we don't tweet as much. It's still toxic. I pay less attention to it. I never got a lot of help out of Twitter from things. I just got vitriol and I got tired of it. So I take a look at it now and then, but we don't get I find that we all say in the Bureau here, we don't get the hits on social media that we used to. And social media like Twitter, it results in very few actual clicks on stories. Most people just read the headlines.
Yeah, I'm disdainful as well, Rob, of social media, but I do think that it's kind of where most people under 50 are getting their information. So it's TikTok, it's Instagram, it's YouTube. People aren't reading our papers or our newscasts anymore. They're responding to memes and clips, and I think that's where it's going.
And they're all pissed off about paywalls.
Yes. Yeah.
They think
Because
they can go to
journalism's free.
Yeah, they think they can go to landsend.com and get a sweater for free. But that's not how it works.
Social media is pretty much king or queen for us, right? It's where our young audience are getting all the information. I mean, I think to Rob's point, we don't use Twitter very much anymore unless like we're just sending out an institutional sort of press release and a link to something. But it's all the other social media accounts, right? Instagram, TikTok, and whatnot. But what we do is it's like bite-sized headlines and then direct them to our landing pages. But it's the search engine for this generation. So we kind of have to be there. So we've certainly increased our support around it. I get it in sort of your areas, like it might not be seen as credible, but certainly for the generation that we're looking to target, that's where they get their credibility from. Like that's where they get all of their news and information. And I'll be frank, I will go to the websites and read the articles out, but a lot of the times because of our attention or like our time, it's like little quick bites on our social media. That's how I keep track of what's happening in the world these days, right? And that's unfortunately is how this younger generation that we're looking to target are finding all of their information. And it's where we are looking to, we continue to build our brand because we need them to know about us. And that seems to be where they're all at the moment.
And that's where all the ads are. That's where the money is. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you got to go to where the people are, right? So if they're in the shopping mall, you got to go there. If they're on late night shows, that's where the audience is. And this is tactically, that's where they are. I share a lot of the same concerns about it because of the misinformation and disinformation. And sometimes the money or foreign interference that's behind a certain, kind of wave of communication. Having said that, I think it's a bit like the invention of the printing press. And when everybody started to write little pamphlets about their views on Christianity or whatever, and it got the Vatican all upset, right? Like this is kind of a transition phase, I hope. And out of this kind of cesspool mess that we're in,
Oh my goodness.
maybe there will be something good that comes out of it, out of this kind of democratization of communication and where people are. Like maybe that there will be something good that comes out of it.
Okay.
The
You know what? We
optimist.
have to call it there, guys. We're timing out. Well, what better place to end it than the printing press and a cesspool?
And then there was TV. Oh, that was a few years later.
Listen, I'd like to thank all of our incredible panelists. This was a really fun conversation. We could have gone on for another hour. I hope we can do it again. Sumi, Rob, Wendy, and Ben, thank you so much. A big thanks to our producers, our behind the scenes guys, the dream team of Emma, Jordan, and Shannon. If you joined late, like Rob, fear not. We'll be sharing the recording of this. So keep your eyes on your inbox, and we'll also have information about more and upcoming webinars. So we'll wrap it up right now and say bye to you all, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you again soon.